Welcome, everyone. If you'd like to put in the chat where you're calling in from, what community area, introduce yourself, please do. We're excited to have you all here. Wonderful. I'm going to start us off with a bit of an introduction. We are recording this session. Yeah, just to confirm. So welcome everybody to the first of our climate action webinar series. The focus of today's session is on resource recovery and land use planning. We have with us Nelson White and Todd Johnston, who are going to speak to those two areas and the pathways within RDCK climate actions. Also included in our panelists is Alex Lefflar, who's providing technical assistance and will be fielding questions and answers behind the scenes. So the outline for today, and yeah, sorry, my apologies. I'll introduce myself as well. My name is Paris Marshall-Smith, and I'll be, along with Alex, guiding us through the session today, your host for today. The outline is that I want to spend a little bit of time just going over the revised engagement process that we've shared with the public last Thursday via media release, and where you can find out more information about it. Oh. John, I see that you've raised your hand, and we are holding questions until after, but I'm wondering if you have a technical issue. Oh, chat says disabled. Thank you. We will make chat available for people to write in their... Alex, are you able to do that, please? Thank you very much. Thanks very much, John. And yes, if there's any other technical issues, please highlight them and Alex will follow that. Oops, still showing my screen. Just one moment. So yes, we launched our revised engagement process last week. This is the beginning of it. And I'll share some more information about that, also some housekeeping. I wanted to speak a little bit about the pathway actions, both the 10 pathways and also the actions. We have the distinguishing between new and existing actions. And then we'll go into the presentations. And the way we're going to do our presentations today are Nelson will speak first around land use, and then there'll be 10 minutes for questions after his presentation. And then Todd will present his material, and then there'll be about 10 minutes for questions after that as well. We imagine that we will not have a chance to answer all questions, so we invite you to send in questions to our email address, and also to check out any frequently asked questions on the website, and we'll provide that information in the chat. So our revised process, it's a mixture of online and in-person engagement, beginning with our website. So you can always find out more information on rdck.ca/climate action, and specifically in the new page, Get Involved, where there's information about registration for the webinars, the list of open houses, and then the other ongoing updates, including the launch of our engagement, RDCK, or engage.rdck.ca, which is launching this Friday. The dialogue circles, which are going to be held in person in preparation for our open houses, those are going to be in August. And then we have 20 open houses across the region, 11 electoral areas and 9 municipalities. That begins at the end of August and runs all the way through October. And that schedule is also available on our website. And in addition to the open houses, which will be general, there'll be subject open houses or meetings focused on areas like transportation, land use, food and agriculture, and water. And we'll be sharing more details as that becomes clearer. In terms of today and the RDCK Climate Action webinar series, so today, as mentioned, we're focusing on resource recovery and land use. Please direct your questions specifically to those two topics. Anything general, we'll do our best to answer on the Q&A, and or you can follow up by email at climateaction@rdck.bc.ca. And if you're not familiar with the Q&A function, it's at the bottom of your screen. I've just circled it in red there. And you can tap on it and then ask your questions. And you can ask them at any point during this webinar, and we'll just keep a log of them and then direct them to either Nelson or to Todd once it's time for questions. A reminder, you may be familiar with this, but if you're brand new to this discussion, welcome. And we have 10 pathways within the Climate Action Plan. We're talking about 2 of them today, land use planning and resource recovery. And the intent is really to provide information about the actions that are proposed in the Climate Action Plan, and also provide some general information about how the work that happens within that area, how residents can get involved in decision-making, how decision-making happens. And so as a reminder, there are 95 actions in the proposed Climate Action Plan. They're across 10 pathways. 60 are in existing work plans. That means that they're part of the work that we do as a regional district, and Nelson and Todd will speak specifically to that. And then there's some about 35 that are new, and these are the ones that are proposed and that are in discussion. And largely the intent is of those new actions is to investigate solutions that make sense for our rural communities. Okay, that's it from me. I'm going to pass it over to Nelson. Welcome, Nelson.
Thanks, Paris. All right, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
And are you seeing the slides?
Correct, yes.
Great, thank you. When I'm presenting, I do lose sight of everybody. So yeah, you need to get a hold of me, just speak up. And I just wanted to do a quick preamble to note that I'm going to be covering a lot of ground and a bit quickly, but to note that I'm going to reference some projects that we're doing in particular, and I think I just want to flag that we have web pages specific to each of those projects where you can get a lot more information. So don't worry if you don't pick it all up here, because there's a lot of content to cover, and I'll do so as quickly and efficiently as I can without talking too quickly and droning on. So
just to note, Nelson, that we're not seeing your presentation slide. We're just seeing it in draft mode.
Weird. Okay.
And while we're doing this, we have enabled the chat. So if there's any technical issues or questions, we do encourage you to put the questions in the Q&A function, but the chat has also been enabled as well. I think if you go to slideshow.
Is it still not showing?
It's still showing just as a, yeah, with all of the toolbar.
That's weird. We were successful when we were testing this earlier, and then of course it's not working. Okay, I was just sharing the window.
If you share your whole desktop, that might be more fun. Yeah, thanks for your patience, everyone. This is a new technology to us as well.
My concern with that is it's going to pull up. Okay, let me just try this, okay?
And if not, we can just go through it as is.
Sure.
And if you do slide, yeah, perfect. Looks great.
Okay, how's that?
Yep.
All right, off we go. What I'm going to be talking about to you all here is what we do in planning services, so the land use and planning function within the RDCK, talk a bit about who we are and what we do. I'm then going to go into the climate actions specific to our role and focusing specifically on these 3 here, the protecting farmland, mitigating against hazards, and a category we're just calling regional growth strategies. It focuses on that regional concept or approach to land use planning. So to begin, I just want to share with you the team that I'm so grateful to work with. So these folks work in planning services with me to provide services in the long range and planning current planning functions. And that's why I'm going to break up a bit of the who we are portion of the talk. So I'm going to begin with the long range planning piece. And sorry, bear with me one sec. So within the long range planning work we do, I split it up into kind of 4 general categories. To note that beginning with the official community plan and development and review portion, that's sort of at a higher level of the work that we do. In the context of that and all our projects, though, we do aim to do regional collaboration, and I'm going to give an example of that both here and as we get into the climate action piece. A lot of the research and analysis we do is for the preparation of hazard mitigation and protection of the natural environment and the different policies and regulations that apply to that. And then the 4th category is zoning bylaw development and review. So that's getting into the regulation piece. So first up on official community plans, this is a project we're working on right now in electoral area I. And note that not all electoral areas have an official community plan, or at least if they do, it maybe doesn't cover the entire electoral area either. But note that these are the roadmaps to development, and they guide future decisions of the board. They capture, hopefully, if we've done our work correctly, the vision for that community, and that's why we identify principally that these are community-driven plans. So we do a lot of engagement in order to capture that vision and reflect it in the plan in order that those future decisions of the board are consistent with what their residents want. Now, the other work we do on regional collaboration, I'm going to identify one project in particular that we started, or actually completed the housing needs assessment in 2020. We did that on a regional basis, recognizing that when it comes to regional work, we're looking at an entire system, and the impacts of that issue don't stop at the electoral area boundaries or the municipal boundaries. So we did that in concert with all the member municipalities. In response to that, we're now working on a housing action plan, and in that work, again, continuing to work with our municipal partners and think on a regional or sub-regional basis as how we identify those specific actions. 2 examples of that collaboration I'm going to identify here that we're participating in or have representation on would be the Greater Nelson Housing Study and the Creston Affordable Housing Development Committee, but there are others. On the hazard mitigation and protection of the natural environment, I'm going to highlight 2 projects underway, partly because we're at a critical decision point on both of them. So the Kootenay Lake Development Permit DPA review project is one where we're looking at how we can better protect the natural environment and mitigate against some of those impacts we've observed through over the course of the last 10 years, where we've seen a loss of habitat and that ecological function. So this is a tool local governments have to better protect the natural environment. The other one related to, in this case, hazard mitigation, and I'll talk to you more further in the presentation, is the Wildfire Development Permit Area Review. And this one considers the establishment of a wildfire DPA to increase resilience of new buildings to wildfire hazards. And the 4th category identified that we deal with in long-range planning includes the review and development of zoning bylaw regulation. And 2 examples to that. One is the Ag Policy Review Project that I'm going to speak to in greater detail when I get to the action items for climate action. And that one is, the sole purpose of it, of course, is to support farming and protect farmland. The other one that falls in this category would be those community planning conversations we hosted in areas D, E, and H over the last couple of years. So that was in response to a request from those residents in those areas who were wanting to learn more about the different land use planning tools available to them. So official community plans, zoning bylaws, and development permit areas. And addressing the issues that they're seeing in their communities, and are these land use planning tools helpful or not? So we did some education awareness on just what the use of those planning tools can be to meet some of their needs, and also hear from those residents as to whether this was desired or not. So a couple examples where we're dealing with the zoning bylaw development and review. On the current planning side of things, we of course have folks that provide that front counter or the immediate customer service to the public. And so you might have met some of those folks. I forgot to mention that there were, when I showed a slide of the staff that are part of planning services, there were 2 people not on that list, or not on that screen, because I don't have headshots for them because they're relatively new to join our team, and that was Allison Fletcher and John Purdy. And those are the 2 folks you might meet on the phone or in person if you come to our counter, because they're providing that service to the public, and as well as the other planners that are providing support to residents who might be pursuing a development application. And I've listed here some of the typical ones you might see if you're a resident looking to do a zoning amendment or a development permit. Oh, and just one other point with our current planning team, they support the advisory commissions. And just one last point on the zoning and the current planning side of things. Our work in current planning would be more focused on that 50% of the regional district that has zoning, but there are still other regulations that apply in areas that aren't zoned. And so this image is just showing those zoned areas versus the unzoned areas. All right, on to the action, the climate action portion. I just wanted to highlight within our realm, that land use and planning piece, our goal here is listed: the RDCK policies and decision-making frameworks and guidelines support and promote healthy, sustainable, and low carbon lifestyles for all residents and minimize risks associated with natural hazards. And within that goal, objectives are to update our planning policies and bylaws to guide future development to create resilient, accessible, and livable communities. The booklet identifies 6 actions, and within that 6, I'm going to just speak to the 3 that I told you I would be speaking to, which is the protection of farmland, the regional growth strategies, and also, oh, hang on a sec. Sorry, I identified the wrong one here. My apologies. So I'm going to launch right into the protecting of farmland one. So the action here is to incentivize local farming, increased farm use, and decreased redevelopment of agricultural land reserve. And how do we do that? I cited before an example of work we're doing under the Ag Policy Review Project, in which we're considering the current legislation and the changes that have been made provincially, and how we might want to amend our land use regulations with the goal of supporting farming and protecting farmland in the regional district. And so just as a bit of a project update on this one, we've completed those updates for areas A, B, and C, so in the Creston area. And we're in the process of completing updates to zoning bylaws in F, I, J, and K, because those are all part of one zoning bylaw. And there's a future part of this project, which would be to make amendments in those areas without zoning. And like I said, we have a specific web page where we can get into more details, or you might want to ask them at the end of my presentation. But here's an example of some of the work that would accomplish. So we can set policy direction within our OCPs. There's also the agricultural area plan that has policy that would guide decisions around subdivision and non-farm use applications in the ALR. And then more specifically on the regulatory side, we were looking at possible changes that would affect how you develop land within the ALR. So farm residential footprints, that restriction and siting location of where you put the residential component in order that it minimizes the impact on the farm base is what's sought to be accomplished through that regulation. And then of course, with the changes that the province made around second residences and farmland. We've addressed that in different ways in different parts of the regional district based on the responses we got through the public engagement part. So in the Creston area, the desire was to be more restrictive on allowing second residences, and in the other areas, the response from the public was to be more consistent with what the ALC was allowing in terms of that expanding of the permissiveness. The second item I was going to speak to is another action that falls within our realm is the mitigation against hazards, and I'm going to speak to two of them, so wildfire and flood hazards. So the first one I mentioned previously, so the action is the integration of community wildfire resiliency plans and floodplain mapping into all our OCPs. So what does that look like? I mentioned the wildfire DPA project, and we're at a critical point here for our board to make a decision as to whether this is going to be something they want to include in our official community plans or not. And so this project contemplates exploring fire smart guidelines for new development in the RDCK. So that's one piece of building fire resilience, wildfire resilience in our region. But that we also explain clearly in the recommendations to our board that we have those other steps we take to address existing development. So fire smart home assessments, the fire smart rebate program, neighborhood recognition program, and the neighborhood champion grant. Just to note that these are all key pieces that we use to encourage adherence to fire smart guidelines. On the flooding hazard, so flooding and other geohazards, the Clearwater and Steep Creek hazards work that was done or begun in terms of the data collection. So that was work that prioritized those hazards that come from flooding, Clearwater flooding, and also the Steep Creek hazards. And some of those portions of our regional district, a lot of the fans, for instance, along our lakes are flat places that people have built over the years. And those are unfortunately also places that can be prone to hazards. So we conducted an assessment for each of these areas. So we actually, our consultants updated the flood hazard mapping for 16 priority flood and Steep Creek hazards, as well as some of the Clearwater flood hazards in our region. And so the follow-up to this work will be consideration of amendments to our official community plans to possibly add development permit areas for these hazards. And that would guide how you could develop in them, or perhaps restrict development more severely, in order that we're not placing additional infrastructure or homes in areas that are subject to these hazards. The other piece of the work that we'll be doing is the revisions to our floodplain management bylaw. On to the regional growth strategy part, just to highlight that this action considers the development of regional growth strategies in areas experiencing growth pressure, or at a minimum, coordinate land use planning in these areas. And I'm going to give an example, just a bit of a graphic example of why that's important. I picked here a part of the regional district at the confluence of Kootenay and Columbia rivers. And so this is just a mapping exercise I just went through just to illustrate how a regional approach to planning is necessary, because the action here seeks to address the challenge posed in providing systems level solutions where the governance model is fragmented. And I'm just going to evidence or just illustrate that with this map. So if we look at water in particular, and so in this one I've just added the aquifer is the green polygon, the hatched blue would be the community watersheds, and then you'll see groundwater wells and the points of diversion, so any surface sources of water. So you can see that within this region quite clearly. Now we add on there the electoral area boundary, so you can see how fragmented the decision making is in the local government context here between areas I and J, who have potentially different official community plans, and the Castlegar, City Castlegar. here's what we're doing currently from an official community plan update. So this is area I, and I'm illustrating here how this is one puzzle piece in a broader picture, and we need to be responding in a regional context when we do this work. So how can we do that? Or how are we doing that better already? And I'm going to speak to a couple of those points. So a more specific action here would be to look at our and learn from our partners across the province in terms of regional districts that have already done this, and how are they accomplishing this? Because it's not always easy to be dealing across different jurisdictional boundaries. But here's a couple successes that we've had lately. So just a note that Calgary is also currently undergoing its OCP review at the same time we're doing Area I. So there's opportunities, and they're taking advantage of those opportunities to share data that could inform policy direction that achieves a similar outcome. And we obviously continue to work to build those relationships between our staff and their staff and consultants working on their official community plan. The other action I gave, or example I gave previously on the regional collaboration piece would be the housing action plan and the housing needs assessment, or sorry, the housing action plan that follows on the housing needs assessment. Recognizing that these issues are all across our region, and we need to be working together in order that we're mitigating any sort of duplication, and we're also not working at cross purposes to one another. So getting near the end, I just want to do a quick recap that I've talked to you a bit about who we are and what we do both in the long range planning world and current planning, and hopefully shared a bit about some of the work that we're doing on protecting farmland and mitigating against hazards, and also trying to do all of this work with a regional lens and thinking regionally or sub-regionally in how we do this work. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back to Paris.
Thanks, Nelson. Excellent. And we have some great questions for you. Just to note that we appreciate lots of enthusiasm around questions. We're going to allow for one question per person and then come back to you. So our first question is from Farrell. How do you rate the importance of GHG issues versus the housing shortage crisis?
Sorry, could you just repeat the first part of that?
Yes. How do you rate the importance of GHG issues versus the housing shortage crisis?
Right. Do you want to take a stab at that, Paris, and then you might want to add more to it?
Yeah, thank you. I don't think there is a versus. I think that we are seeing this as complementary actions, that as we respond to climate action, we're also responding to the needs of residents. So one example is our regional energy efficiency program that is focused on rural residents and focused on making living in houses, so reducing energy poverty so that people can live in their houses more affordably as energy prices go up, and also reduce the amount of energy that people are using. I think the work that Nelson is doing in his crew in terms of looking at the density of communities and trying to be very strategic about where communities are placed is also a question around climate action, so that we reduce the risk of people moving into flood zones, but also ensuring that we're providing good quality housing.
Paris, I was going to say exactly the same thing, that
Great.
It isn't really an either or. You can accomplish both, and they're mutually supportive of one another, or can be if we do it right.
Excellent. Great. Then we have a question, and Todd, did you want to answer it or save it for another of the question of, oh, we've got an answer as well. Alex has provided some information in the chat about what is the definition of carbon. We have provided a direct link down to the IPCC report, which is what we refer to, but you wanted to provide some additional information?
Yeah, I tried to answer that online and it didn't work.
Okay.
But I think when we use the term carbon, it's, I mean, we're not referring specifically to the element of carbon in that narrow of a definition. I think the term is used very loosely to refer to carbon dioxide or carbon dioxide equivalent. So greenhouse gases are often just loosely referred to as carbon.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Yes, we often see it as written as CO2e, a small e, which is referencing the CO2 equivalent. So, but it's used as a proxy for understanding greenhouse gas emissions. Thank you. Our next question comes from Julie L. And it says, can you give an idea of how no zoning areas will be eventually zoned? And that's in the Q&A, Nelson, if you want to see the question there.
Okay.
Can you give an
how
idea?
it would be eventually zoned? I guess, well, another question is, will they be? You know, the question of zoning or any of the work we do is really dependent on what the residents want in terms of the majority. And it came up in some of the work that we did I mentioned in areas D, E, and H, where we were going out to the communities and speak to people about different land use planning tools and whether they were going to be helpful in addressing their concerns or not. And we heard a mix, but I'd say there was a lot of areas that really did want zoning. And so in those areas, we'll have to go back and do a lot more engagement with those residents to understand just where exactly that might happen and identify how. So there's just a bit of context. I've only worked in municipalities prior to joining the regional district. So this notion of not having zoning is really new to me. It's not something in my 20 years of work as a planner I'd experienced until I came to the regional district, because all the municipalities I work for, they have zoning. So I recognize that it's actually quite a challenge. It could be quite a challenge to deal with a blank slate where there's no zoning, and then how do you work with the residents to accomplish what they're after in a way that addresses the need in the most democratic way possible, and sort of minimizes disruptions to those who are really opposed to it too.
Thanks, Nelson. Thanks very much, Amy. I see your question. It was in chat, and Farrell, we also see your second question. We're going to respond to those folks that haven't asked a question yet, and then come back to you if we have time. So, Amy, you're next, and the question is, why are all community watersheds being commercially logged? Is it not a huge GHG instigation? I can take a stab at it if you like. Do you want me to start on that one, Nelson?
Oh, sorry, I was just reading it again. Please do, Paris. Thank you. Yeah.
Great. So we, as a local government, and thinking about the 3 tiers of government, 3 orders of government, local, provincial, and federal, we actually don't have jurisdiction over what is known as unceded territory, provincial land, public provincial land, or crown land. And that's primarily a lot of the area that is watersheds. It's held in tenure for different purposes. Often it can be for logging. And so, and yet we bear the brunt as residents, as local governments. We understand the direct impact of logging in watersheds. And so we've created an initiative called the Watershed Governance Initiative. And that's intending and trying to create conditions for collaborative decision-making, because we agree that it's the ongoing logging, the way that it's been happening has been impacting not only our drinking water systems, but also downstream activities in terms of residences, making it unstable, and has a huge impact on the livability and quality of life for our regional district. And so we're trying to influence that, but we don't have jurisdiction in terms of taking direct action. Do you want to add anything else, Nelson?
No, that's excellent. Thanks, Paris.
Great. Then we have a question from Corrine. And this is a question for you, Nelson. This is what I'm understanding. Please confirm. The RDCK will tell farmers where they are allowed to build on their farms, and if they are allowed to put a second residence on. RDCK will create regulations around building close to 16 creeks.
All right, I'll maybe start with the first part around the regulation. And you know what might be helpful, because again, there's probably limited time that we can get into any of these issues, and some of it's a bit more complex, and it depends where you are. So I invite Corinne, if you wanted to call me after, and we can go over those in detail. But maybe the sort of a summary response would be to say that the farm residential footprint regulation does seek to direct where that residential portion of the development occurs in order to minimize its impact on the land base. So that would be close to the road and of a limited size. So those are what that one seeks to achieve. And that was in existence prior to the most recent changes we made. We've had that as part of the regulation in the Creston area for some time. So there wasn't any change to that. And what was the other one? It was, sorry, just got to scroll back. Where to build, oh, and then the second residence. And same with the second residence. That regulation too varies depending on where it is in the regional district. But the short story, I guess, would be that the Land Commission recently made their regulations around second residences more permissive. So where they previously required that or permitted a single wide home for family, they made that requirement anybody could occupy the second residence, and they were more permissive in the type as well. So it wasn't just a single wide, but it could be a stick-built home, conventional construction, but just of a limited size. And again, where you're talking in the regional district is different in terms of that regulation. So that's why I invite you to call me and we can go through the details there.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Nelson. And we've now run out of our question time, so we'll move over to Todd. I know Corinne had an additional question. We will be talking about water next week, and so there's a whole presentation dedicated to water. And Farrell, we can follow up on email about your second question. Over to you, Todd.
Thanks, Paris. Alex, are you able to get my presentation up on the screen? Okay, is it on the screen? Because my view is probably different. At any rate, I'll introduce myself. My name is Todd Johnston, and I'm an environmental coordinator with the RDCK in our resource recovery group. And the term resource recovery is really just a $5 word for solid waste management, but it really aligns with our principle of fine-tuning and evolving our programming so that we are recovering more resources, whether it be through organics diversion, which is just composting, or recycling programs and other things, and landfilling less. So that is kind of, that's the continuum that we're on. So our program, we run a number of recycling programs. We've just recently gotten into the business of composting regionally. Well, actually, we don't, our compost facilities don't affect the entire region, but we have it in the east and very soon in the central. And a lot of the work that we do is around protecting the environment. We've got a lot of site environmental controls and screening programs, and that is designed to ensure that we are diverting as much hazardous materials for direct proper disposal as possible. In 2022, we diverted approximately 26% of the material by weight received at our Udashenia landfill, which is our largest landfill. So these programs are definitely effective, and our hopes are that they will continue to be more and more effective over time. So the slide that we've got up here, we're kind of getting ahead there, Alex. Can you go back to the second slide? There we go. Okay, so in regards to what we're doing for the climate strategy, I've only got 20 minutes here, and where the most action has happened with this is in our organics diversion. And that's what I'm going to focus on. I'd like to give some program updates and talk about where we're at with the construction of our processing facilities, our partnering on curbside services, our work with rural communities, and where we're at with attracting industrial, commercial, and institutional organic waste. Next slide, please. So this is a air photo of our entire region. It is massive. We're spread out over 23,000 kilometers, square kilometers. And within that, we operate 3 landfills, 13 waste transfer stations, 23 recycling depots, and almost 2 compost facilities. We should be live with the composting in August in Central Salmo if everything goes right. We're very close. And this is just to give some perspective. This is not a typical regional district scenario where we're so spread out. We have 80 on-site employees. Those are the folks who are working the waste scales, doing the screening, running the landfills and the transfer stations. So it is a lot to manage, and it comes with many challenges. And enough said on that. Can we move to the next slide, please? So what you see pictured here is a waste composition study, and this is standard practice for local governments, where we have people who basically take the garbage as it comes in for a set period of time and categorize it. And the reason why I've shown that is because we are soon to do that. As a region, we have not yet really had the time to do a waste composition study. It's quite a detailed prospect. But how we've set our targets is looking at comparables, other regional districts with similar populations and policies in place. And from that, we've come to, we've got a pretty, we're pretty confident that our organic material is sitting at around the 25 to 30%. And if you combine yard and garden waste and compostable paper with that, it gets upward around 40%. And after 1 year of running our Creston composting facility and comparing those tonnages versus what we're seeing brought in from those curbside programs in mixed waste, that's actually validating that assumption that it is around 30% of that organic material. So that actually is a strong indication of the potential that we have within this region for diversion. And you know, the good news with that is that there's a greenhouse gas implication reduction implications from that. There's also landfill space savings from that. So the more we're keeping the stuff out of our landfills, the longer our landfills will last. And another component to that is leachate management. So organic material tends to be quite wet and runs through the landfills, and there's a lot of contamination issues with that. Not necessarily from the material itself, but as it leaches through from other materials in the landfills and gets into groundwater. So we've got a lot of drivers for doing this above and beyond just climate action. Next slide, please, Alex. So what I've got here is just some photos of what a typical aerated windrow composting system looks like. So right now in Creston, our system is up and running. And what you see, that photo on the left is a 3-foot high pile called a windrow. And so the organic material comes in there, the food waste, the kitchen scraps, whatnot. It gets piled into these windrows. And it's mixed with wood chips to create more airspace and also as a carbon source. And then there's piping, which pushes air up through the system so that it's not breaking down in an anaerobic process, meaning without oxygen. So we're not generating any significant greenhouse gases through this process as compared to what happens when it gets stuck into a landfill where there is no air and we are generating methane. And the middle photo is a screener. So after your material has sufficiently broken down, it goes through a screening process, which removes contaminants, wood chips, rocks and debris, and then it's ready to have a final product, which can be land applied, used as a compost, set out for retail, whatever the case may be. So, and those 3 infographics that I have on the right-hand side there are just highlighting you know, the basic benefits of doing a program like this. So just a few facility updates that I have. As I said, Creston has been operating for 1 year. The majority of that material is coming from their residential curbside program. The first batch of cured compost is done, and we still don't have direction from our elected officials, and staffing hasn't made any recommendation about what is going to happen with that final material. could go through, we could try and recover some costs through retail. It could go towards farmlands. We're not sure. That is a decision that's well above me. The Salmo facility is near completion with construction. We're going to be doing some testing in July, doing some run-throughs with yard and garden waste, make sure everything's working well. And August 21st is the targeted date for food waste to be brought into the city of Castlegar in their curbside program. We have plans in place to develop a compost facility in the cusp, just preliminary designs in the work right now, so I don't have any dates on that. And at Udashenya and Groman Narrows, though, we will have transfer services so that people, businesses, whatever, can bring in organic material that will then be transferred to the facility, to the processing facility. Next slide, please, Alex. Oh, actually, no, sorry, you're on the right slide. Okay. So we definitely rely heavily on our municipal partners that have existing curbside programs. That is the low-hanging fruit it's the obvious choice for getting organic material and getting a consistent level of organic material to start your facilities, and then you grow from there. So Creston, they had just garbage services over a year ago, and last summer they began expanding that to include recycling and kitchen waste. Castlegar is, they already have recycling, but they will be expanding to compost, and we expect to see that material coming in August. They've got a little bit more. They've got larger bins, and they're going to be including leaves and twigs as well. City of Nelson has taken an innovative approach from traditional curbside services, and they are providing their residents with countertop pretreatment devices, which dehydrates the food waste. We will be receiving some of that dehydrated food waste. We don't know in what volumes, and it's going to be interesting to see how that works in the facilities, just because nobody's ever done it before. And we're also expecting in October to be receiving a very large amount of organic material coming from the regional district of Kootenay boundary in October. The Greater Trail area is diverting all of their organic material and bringing it to the Salmo facility. Next slide, please, Alex. So our consultants back in 2020 were looking at the potential for how much organic material could actually be recovered and composted. And it was in the 50% of regional organic material could go that route just through municipal curbside programs where we have density. But they were looking at the potential for feasible neighborhoods within electoral areas. And by feasible, I mean that have that density, that are on the major routes, that could efficiently be picked up in addition to the municipal curbside programs. And if we were able to capture organic waste from all of those feasible communities, it upped it from the 50-something% up into the 80s%. So that's definitely something that's of interest to us. We have been communicating with the electoral areas and those communities that were identified as being feasible to receive this service. Matt Morrison, our organics coordinator, has done a lot of work, engagement, and we've heard loud and clear there's some communities that absolutely don't want it or don't seem to want it, and there's others that maybe do. So what we do is we present that information to the directors, and if it's looking promising that some of those communities, that there's sufficient enough positive enthusiasm for that program, then it would go to an electoral assent process, which means it goes through a formal voting process. So my guess is probably not all of those communities will wind up with this service, and some of them will. But at the end of the day, it is up to the residents through a voting process. And for the ones where it seemed to be, it's looking like there's not a majority of people interested in it, I don't think it would even make it to that stage. So that's where we're at with that. Alex, could we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so what we have here is just a picture of a commercial kitchen, and you can see that the person working at that kitchen has got a giant green bin. That's what it looks like when they've got organics in commercial operations such as restaurants. And this is what we are trying to entice right now. So we don't have a mandatory requirement of institutions, commercial operations, or industries to be diverting their organic waste. But we have set our pricing to hope to entice some of that. So the tonnage, the per ton disposal fee for organic waste is quite a bit lower than what you would pay for mixed waste. And Matt Morrison, the fellow that I referred to earlier, has been doing some outreach to these businesses. And so we're hoping some of them will actually see a business case, a viable business case, where it will actually make sense for them to be doing that diversion just because of those savings in the tipping fees. And so that's where we're at with the engagement on that. There's a lot of organic material to be had from the businesses. So we will continue to pursue getting that material diverted. We don't have any bans or we don't have any sticks. It's all carrots right now, but we'll see where that goes in the future. And we're hoping to get some voluntary buy-in on that. Alex, did you want to move it to the next one? Okay, so actually I was much quicker than I thought I was going to be. I must have been talking fast. I will leave it open to questions. If anybody has any questions, it looks like there's a few in the queue, and hopeful that I'll be able to answer.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Todd. Yes, we have quite a few questions, and I will start with Amy Andrews. Amy asks, why doesn't Nelson, it's the first question in the Q&A, why doesn't Nelson have solar panel recycling? It's 300 times more toxic, lanthanum nuclear waste, and goes straight into regular metal waste. And so, yes, so just to clarify, Amy, we're the regional district here, but yes, Nelson could possibly feed into the regional district recycling program. Any thought on solar panel recycling, Todd?
Okay, solar, like, are they talking about having solar power at the recycling facilities or the recycling of solar panels?
The recycling of solar panels.
Okay,
yes.
Good. Yeah, I have looked into that because we are starting to see some of our solar panels coming in to some of our facilities. And to be honest, I didn't know what to do with them at first. I did look into that. And I talked with our recycling coordinator to find out whether this is ever going to be a stewardship program, because when I was looking on research, it seems that a lot of these panels come to end of life after 20 years, and we are anticipating, not just the regional district, I think everybody's anticipating all of a sudden having a lot of panels. So I didn't see, I actually also reached out to some of the solar panel providers, didn't hear a lot back from them. I did find about a proprietary technology that's being piloted in Paris. Or some might not have been Paris, but it was in France. And the claims were that they were able to efficiently recapture the metals that are embedded in those solar panels, as well as the silicone and glass. And I think you need a certain amount of economy of scale. However, we did hear back from the province that this is on their list as well, and that they're looking into it. So I'm absolutely with you. I really hope we get a stewardship program for recycling panels. And I think that this message has been getting to the province. They're the ones who dictate what we can and cannot recycle, and make it affordable for us by mandating these things and having those eco fees when you purchase them, so that we have money to actually process it and get through recycling. So I'm optimistic, but that's as much as I know at this point.
Great, thank you. And that goes to our larger investigation as well around construction demolition waste, and just how we start to build out those streams that are not currently common practice. We have a question here from Farrell. It's our second question. Diverting organics from the landfill only moves the decomposition to another place. Canada's total waste contribution for GHG emissions is around 4% of all GHGs. Are we not wasting money chasing a minimal volume which ends in the dump?
Well, my understanding is that when you're doing an aerated composting, it's a different process altogether. So yeah, it breaks down in a landfill, but it breaks down in a way that generates methane, and methane is one of the most potent greenhouse gases out there. So it's, Paris, you may correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's in the 30 times range of CO2. So that's what most local governments are doing that are running landfills as the first step in trying to reduce those emissions. I don't know what the national averages are for. I can't even remember how you phrased it, Farrell, but I can't speak to the numbers that you're putting out there. Although I know that when the analysis was done of our region, it was assumed that, or not assumed, it was determined that our program, the solid waste or resource recovery program, was responsible for a significant amount of our greenhouse gases. Paris, do you have that off top of head?
I don't. Oh, I don't. Let's come back to it because I do have it on the, yes, on the, I think I have it on the program. Anyhow, I don't have it off the top of my head.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
we can, and through email or phone calls, I'm happy to get more into the weeds with that and provide more resources.
Yeah, great. We then have a bunch of questions from Amy. Thank you very much, Amy. Alex is going to take a shot at answering them on through the Q&A. We're going to move so that we hear as many different voices as possible. Now to Mo, who says, Healthy Community Society in New Denver and Silverton has an active composting system with enthusiastic community buy-in. Will the RDCK cooperate with this and any other similar approaches, or will you just ignore all this great community-driven initiative?
Well, to what degree the RDCK gets involved in supporting the work that's going out at New Denver is above, that's above my decision making. The work that is being done, though, was recognized in the resource recovery plan that we sent out to the province, which basically lays the pathway for the coming decade. And yeah, and I agree that I've actually met with some of the folks who have been doing the work out there in that area, and it's great. And I hope that it's sustainable, because I think that's one of the things that is one of the difficulties with that, is you can get community burnout. But there is great work going out there, and how the RDCK proceeds in supporting that at a later stage, once we've got our other things stabilized, whether that's a financial contribution or something else in kind, is definitely a possibility. Again, I think that's a later stage, and I'll also extend that invite for chats on that, and I'm happy to put you in touch with some of my bosses who may have better commentary on that, because my direct work I haven't had a ton to do with that.
And just on that, Nelson, could you put your contact information in the chat so that people have access to it? And also Todd, if you have a moment. For common, it's our first initial and then our last name at rdck.bc.ca. We have a question then from Mary Ann. Any plans for organics at Caslow landfill site?
There's no immediate plans for organics at the Caslow transfer facility. We could end up with transfer services there. It really depends on the logistics. What we do when we're looking at, where we'll accept different materials, a lot of it's based on the efficiencies, because we do have costs and greenhouse gas associated with moving that material with trucks. So depending on how much material we can recover and how often we have to move it, unlike wood waste or metal or even regular garbage, that stuff can sit there for a lot longer at a transfer station. So we can wait till those bins are basically bursting at the seams before we'll go and move it with a truck. With organics, it could be like it has to be moved more frequently. So that's a logistics question. Not to say I'm not aware of if and when. We're slowly building out with our organics acceptance and transfer facilities. So it is entirely a possibility, and perhaps, or it could be that Caslow is supported in a different way that's maybe more efficient. i.e. not bringing it not bringing it to an organics facility, but supporting either a community initiative or, you know, it could be something like what Nelson is doing. And I'm just speaking out off the top of my head, but I think there's lots of rooms to find the best solution for dealing with organics in the other areas.
Nice. Well, unfortunately, we're at 2:30, which means that we're out of time. We do see that there's additional questions. I noticed from Concerned Citizen that you've asked a question about the CO2 that's projected to be reduced per pathways. And if you go to page 9 of the booklet, that provides a diagram of what we anticipate can be reduced by the actions within each pathway. Please always feel free to follow up with us by email, and we'll do our best to respond to the specific questions as they've come up in the chat. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time and attention today. It was a wonderful beginning to our webinar series. We will have this recorded and available on our website within the week. And we look forward, we have another session tomorrow and then another one on Thursday. And we look forward to if you're joining us for those. Wonderful. Anything from our panelists just to close?
Just to thank you for organizing and inviting me. Appreciate it. And thanks, Todd. I learned a lot about your work too.
Yeah, likewise, Nelson. Yeah, thank you so much, Paris, for this opportunity. I know that in my department, we're so much of our work is just keeping the lights on. Like we're operationally driven, and so opportunity. I think we don't have enough opportunities to have these types of conversations and to be visible in the public. And so I want to see more of it. And in our department, we're looking for ways to become more visible with sharing information. So you got my email address. Happy to take emails from anybody and have a conversation on the phone. And thanks everyone for taking the time out to attend.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Bye.